Hi there, and welcome to Coffee with Phil, where our goal is to help you live a life of purpose on purpose. Walking with God sounds easy, but how many of you know it never follows the script you prepared? In this podcast, Phil shares stories from his personal journey in the hopes that his experience, the good, the bad, and the ugly, will help you as you walk with God on your own journey. Grab your coffee and enjoy this practical and personal episode with your podcast host, Phil Strong.
Well, hi everyone, welcome to the podcast. Welcome to Coffee with Phil. And here I am sitting talking to myself as usual. If the neighbours look through the window, they'll probably be amused to see me here chatting with myself. The dog's actually looking at me like I'm a weirdo. Well, if I knew what was going through her mind, I would be famous. No one knows what's going through that dog's mind, that's for sure. But here I am chatting to myself in the afternoon. Just recorded episode 80 and doing 81 back to back. Sometimes I find I just get a little bit of a rhythm going. There's a bit of creative flow, particularly in the afternoon. I was chatting with Carla in the office, and we're talking about work zones, and I was referencing the content that I talked about in, I think it was episode number 78. Let me get my references right, I'm not sure, but how to make the most out of every minute. And talked to Kerry Newhoff's content about managing your energy, and she was acknowledging that for her, you know, there's a window where she gets a second wind between 2:30 and 3:30 in the afternoon. And I've got to say, often I come home to record these episodes because I get a bit of creative juice flowing at about 3 o'clock. Sometimes that's with a coffee. I'm not going to talk coffee today. Sometimes it's with a licorice tea. Regular listeners will know I'm a fan of a licorice tea late in the afternoon. That'll be happening after I've recorded this episode. I can assure you of that. Well, welcome to episode 81. The title of this podcast is The Toughest Conversation. And this one's going to bite, so buckle up, listeners, and you might want to listen to this more than once to make sure you get the best you can out of it for your own benefit. And I would urge you to have this conversation with someone in the near future. The onus is on you for that. I want to refer back to episode 79, and I think the title was something like Things I Learned in the ED. And by ED, I refer to the emergency department. And in that, I talk about an episode experience and an evening where I, with my wife, sat in the emergency department waiting for consultation, having a whole lot of tests. And you can listen to that episode. It's episode 79. But I tell you what, when you're sitting in the ED, a lot goes through your mind. Well, it did for me. A lot goes through your mind. I mean, part of the purpose of that episode was more to talk about what I observed about the human condition and the personal condition of myself, but a lot goes through your mind, which I want to talk about. And the truth is, obviously it depends. If you're in agonizing pain, then you're not processing much, but you do ask yourself some really important questions. In that space where you're not sure what's happening and you're sitting at the hospital waiting to see a doctor, you want to ask some important questions. And I want to refer to that in this podcast. And the final thing that I would say about that experience is in the ED, it's impossible to escape reality. You are confronted with real life. You're confronted with your mortality. You're confronted with the fact that you can't predict how your path goes. You can do your best to stay healthy, but none of us write the human genetic DNA, nor do we dictate the number of days. So there's no escaping reality. We just have to ride the wave. And look, I don't know if you're a faith person or not, but I couldn't do this journey without having faith in a higher power, knowing that God is my creator, my friend and my savior, and that he's with me in all the experiences of life. So I want to talk about the toughest conversation. We're sitting there. It was probably about 9 o'clock at night, been there for some time. And Kathy turned to me and she said, "What changes will we make if this turns out to be serious?" What changes will we make if this turns out to be serious? And I don't remember having much wisdom, to be honest with you, but I did say to her, and I acknowledged, look, if this is serious, we have to make some more changes. We've been working on health, we've been working on mental health, we've been working on emotional and spiritual health, but I think I was willing to acknowledge that sometimes there's even more change needed. And the reason why I wanted to put that question right at the front end, because trust me, the conversation gets a little more tough than this, but I think we've got to acknowledge, I was reading a book recently, and Wayne Cadero is a pastor from Hawaii, and been through a challenging season as a leader, and I was really enjoying his book. I think it's the book's called Leading on Empty by Wayne Cadero, Pastor Wayne Cadero from Hawaii. And, he was really challenging you to think, the reader, me, he's challenging me, to think about, if you only had 1 month to live, would you make the same decisions? Now, I wasn't in that position. I'm not literally, but he was also challenging to say, well, what if, what would you plan your life differently? And so I recently confessed in an article that I wrote for a newspaper that I've been reviewing my priorities. And in that article, I said, look, I've been reviewing my priorities past, present, and future. Because that means I've got to look backwards to see what has driven me to arrive at this point. And am I happy to accept the charted destination based on my choices? Because decisions that I make based on what's important to me, my priority system, that are what gets me in the direction I'm going, and I'm going to end up somewhere based on the choices I've made. And so, what changes will we make if this turns out to be serious? Well, what if you just had to make changes to avoid it becoming serious? I mean, that's a tough conversation to have. And so in that, I've been processing it. And again, you'd understand that my nature is that I consume a lot of content. I read a lot of books, mostly at the same time, and I listen to podcasts. And I was watching a reel, I think it was, from Kerry Newhoff recently. And he was referencing the fact that in America, in the last month, and this is 2024, mid-2024 on the calendar for a timestamp, there's been 3 major announcements about significantly high-profile church leaders being stood down because of immorality. And he was querying that, and I'm going to say categorically that doesn't apply in this situation. I'm not confessing anything because there's no need to. But in that, he was saying, one of the things that really held him through his tough seasons as a church leader is the second question that I wanted to bring into the toughest conversation, and that's this: am I called to this? And if so, am I committed to it? So he basically said, Kerry said, look, you don't want to be in leadership if you're not called to it. And quite frankly, you wouldn't want to be in it unless God was calling you into it. But if God is calling you into it, it's because he's got a pathway for you to flourish with him. And so you've got to be very clear on the conviction of what you're called into. But more than that, if you are called to it, if God's set an assignment for you, then you've got to be committed to it. And the best example of that in the Bible is the story everyone knows about Jonah and the whale. He was called to an assignment as a prophet of God to go to the city of Nineveh, but he chose not to be committed to it, and he jumped in a boat and went in the opposite direction, literally geographically heading west on the Mediterranean instead of east inland. and he had an encounter with a fish, and you can read that story in the book of Jonah. But am I called to it? Am I crystal clear? Do I have a conviction? Do I understand what has God invited me into? That's the calling of God. You know, Isaiah heard the call of God. Samuel heard the call of God. Saul of Tarsus on the road to Damascus in Acts chapter 9 gets knocked off his donkey, suddenly hears the voice of Jesus and is called out of that space of persecuting the church into building the church with Jesus. There's a calling, a divine calling. And so one of the really important aspects of a tough conversation is to ask yourself, and this is what I've been doing, am I called to this? Like, I don't want to do it if I'm not called to it. And I certainly don't want to work through the challenges if I'm not called to it, because I'm fighting the hand of God. So it's really important in part of this reviewing priorities, past, present, and future, is to understand, am I still called to this? And one of my oversight review meetings, I talked in the last podcast about having short accounts with accountability. I've got an overseeing minister that I am accountable to, and I remember him saying to me one day, he says, "Look, you don't have to do this if you're not called to it. Don't sit in the midst of a challenge that's not your fight to fight." And by that, he was really encouraging me to come back to that place of prayer and petition before God and say, God, is this what you've got for me in this season? Am I called to it? And if so, am I committed? So the first part of the tough conversation was, what changes do we need to make if this is serious, or to avoid it being serious? Secondly, am I called to this? Am I committed to it? And then the third question is this: will I accept the burden of responsibility without paying the wrong price? Now, I've got to unpack this, I suppose, a little bit more. This means a lot to me, this question. And I suppose I should help you understand why, if you didn't quite grasp it. Every calling has a burden of responsibility. And in the Bible, I refer to the parable of the talents. The master goes away on a journey and he entrusts his servants with responsibility. And that's what I'm calling the burden of responsibility. And he comes back, the master comes back to get a report on, what have you done with the talent I gave you? What have you done with the responsibility I've given you? And then he issued a reward based on the profitability or the success of the servants. And that's what I mean by the burden of responsibility. God invites us in to partner with him. He promises grace, unmerited favor, his partnership, his strength, if only we'll submit to his will. But that still requires us to turn up. You can't just sit there passive in your calling and expect that God is going to be happy with you sitting on your hands doing nothing with what he's given you, because he says in the parable to the servant who buried the talent, you lazy fool. And he was banished. So the burden of responsibility is something, when you say yes to the call of God, you're saying, yeah, I'm going to turn up. Yeah, I'm willing to bear the burden of responsibility. But the second half of that question is just as important for me. Will I accept the burden of responsibility without paying the wrong price? Because you can be signed up to the call of God and do things in the wrong way and either kill yourself in the process or certainly hurt yourself permanently in the process. Now, there's a fine line here. It's like a knife edge that I've been wrestling with, because I want to apply myself diligently to the call of God in my life, and I want to work to the best of my ability. But when I'm trying to achieve things in my personal strength and not trusting in God's hand at work, then I'm going to pay the wrong price. I'm going to literally burn out or abuse myself mentally, emotionally, and physically, which is the wrong price. God does not call us into these kind of challenges to flog ourselves to death. Now, the flip side of that is he does call us into these challenges to reveal who he wants us to become. And the journey is vital in the refining and the maturation and the discipleship that God wants to do in our lives on the way to the destination. God is always preparing us for the next level of responsibility that he's prepared for us. I was on a phone call this afternoon just with another pastor in another city, talking about connecting in the future. And she said to me, we're just talking about some of the challenges. And she said, look, God is definitely doing his work to prepare you for that next season. And I'm willing to accept that price. I'm willing to accept the price of discipline. I'm willing to accept the price of even a correction or a rebuke from God. I'm willing to accept that he's the potter and I'm the clay. That's the price I'm willing to pay in the journey as I walk out my calling, if I'm serious about what God's invited me into. But what I'm not willing to pay is the wrong price, the price of the martyr who dies unnecessarily. So look, this is a tough conversation. And you may not have had a trip to the ED recently. I hope you haven't. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't have this conversation. Maybe this is a season that God's called you to take yourself aside, refresh yourself in him, and then have this conversation with someone as a means by which you can be accountable and really challenge yourself on the walk that you're carrying in your faith walk this season. Because, these conversations about faith made real. Come on, friends. This is not about, living an easy Christian life where I've got my bus ticket to heaven and all fun, no responsibility. No. You're called to the kingdom. You're an ambassador of the kingdom, and you've got a responsibility within that kingdom to serve the king. And he's Lord of all, including you. So that's why this is a really, really tough conversation. So reviewing priorities is important, past, present, and future. And just as a little side note, snuck into the middle of the episode here for those that are really sticking to it, I read a question in a book recently which has challenged me in the way I relate to my other pastor friends. But what if the most important question was this? Here's what the author says. What if the most important question in the church wasn't how good is the pastor's message, but rather how good is the pastor's health? Physically, emotionally, spiritually. And I'm using that as a yardstick for the way that I interact with my pastor friends. I'm not looking at their growth charts. I'm not looking at, their social media. Couldn't give a worry or I don't care for that sort of thing. I'm like, man, how's it really going? How are you feeling in this? And what are you celebrating and what are you challenged? So reviewing our life and priorities is the toughest conversation we could have, and it's the toughest conversation we should have. And so as I finish this podcast, I want to come to my personal application on this, because that's what we're committed to talking about in the context of Coffee with Phil. It's faith made real, living a life of purpose on purpose. And so I sat down this afternoon, I said, well, let's reconfirm what's most important. And I want to share that with you, and then I want to share with the part that's toughest for me. And if you're close to me, you can walk with me through this. So reconfirming what's important, I wrote down 5 things. I was recently, I think I just said to you, I was reading a book by Pastor Wayne Cadero, and he was really challenged in a season of his life. He actually, I've never had this, but he found himself sitting on the curb of a road in Los Angeles one afternoon in the middle of a run in the afternoon, and he was sobbing into the gutter, he said, and he didn't know what was wrong with him. That was his experience, not mine, but what it led to was him taking time out to review and refresh his priorities. And so this was an exercise in a book I was reading on the weekend. So here's what I sat down and wrote this afternoon. I'm thinking, well, what's most important? And the absolute number one priority for me is my personal friendship with Jesus. That's not about having faith in Jesus. That's locked in. It's about the growing friendship. Friendships can grow deeper, and they can grow deeper, and they can grow deeper. If you just thought of the first 5 friends that come to your mind and you wrote their name down on a piece of paper, I think you could probably say that you have a different level of depth in the friendship with each of those 5. It's just naturally how friendships evolve through seasons and through time. Well, I would say to you that Jesus is the most important friend you've got. And so therefore, if it's the most important friend you've got, then shouldn't it be the deepest friendship you've got? And what would it look like if your friendship with Jesus was going deeper? And that's the most important thing in this time. I've adopted some of the practices of Peter Scazzero with emotionally healthy spirituality, John Mark Comer in his book Practicing the Way. If you just search the podcast channel, you'll find all the references to those books and the podcasts where I've unpacked some of those things. But often I start my quiet time in silence. And I just say, I just want to be with you, Jesus. I come before you and not for anything, but just to be with you. And I try and discipline myself to slow down my mind and just have that moment of silence for the purpose of connection. Speaking of connection, number 2 on the list is protecting my connection with Kathy. And I've chosen those words carefully because, we've been married, we've been together 30 years, married for 28 years coming up soon. And, we're committed, we're in love, we're doing life together, we're having fun. But what's most important is protecting that connection. It's what am I doing to invest in it, to strengthen it? What am I doing to make sure I don't break it? What am I doing to make sure I don't cause problems inside that connection? What am I doing to make that connection healthy? So protecting my connection with Kathy is number 2 on the list. Number 3, supporting my kids to flourish. So I'm in a season where I have adult children. They don't live at home. They both have their own careers, professional lives, personal lives, but I want them to do well. And so for those of you that are transitioned from little kids to teenagers, you'll know you've got to learn to parent your children differently. And it's no different when they become adults. You're still the parent, but you're in a different role. You're more of a coach than a parent, and I really want to see my kids flourish. I want them to live the best life. I want them to be all that God made them to be, and I'm going to do what I can to invest in that and support that, but I'm not going to do it for them. So supporting my kids to flourish. Now, those 3 will not be surprising to you. Now, the next 2 won't be surprising to you, but I'm going to read them out the way I wrote them. So number 1 was personal friendship with Jesus. Number 2 was protecting my connection with Kathy. Number 3 was supporting my kids to flourish. Now then I wrote down number 4, wrestling with my assignment. Now what I mean by that is the invitation that God's given me to partner with Him, and what I'm called into in this season is to be connected to a local church, to be a leader of a local church, and to really pursue what God wants to do in our community. That's my assignment, and I mean that probably what I spend most of my energy doing. But here's where the struggle is at the moment. Is the 5th thing I wrote on my list was filling my tank, my personal tank, filling my tank through refreshing activities. I put that as number 5. And then I sat back. So I just naturally wrote it out. And then I sat back and I was like, ooh. And what I did is I drew big arrows to swap numbers 4 and 5. So if you remember, number 4 was wrestling with my assignment, which is about my practical day-to-day work activities and fulfillment of my church assignments, my ministry assignments. And number 5 was filling my tank with refreshing activities. And what I've done is I've just had this aha moment where I've gone, you know what, in the season, to reorder my priorities and what's important, I have to shift filling my tank through refreshing to number 4 and move wrestling with my assignment to number 5. Does it mean that I diminish my burden of responsibility? No, because I already answered that question back at the beginning of the podcast. I'm willing to accept the burden of responsibility. I just don't want to pay the wrong price. And so what I'm saying to you, to be accountable to you, and if you're walking with me, you can challenge me on this, is lifting the priority to filling my tank through refreshing to higher than it has been in the past. And this is a major reset for me. This is a shift that as I sit here contemplating it, I'm challenged by it because I'm not actually very good at it. And I don't know what I'm going to do about it, but I'm being honest about at least facing it. And so this is a major change in focus for me. And what makes this most challenging is I'm not diminishing how important I think my job is, what I'm paid to do, my calling to be the leader of a local church. But what I'm saying is it's unsustainable in the current priority structure that I've set up. And that's what makes it challenging, because anytime you reset priorities, you're going to go through a challenge. You know, if you suddenly decide you want to go on a weight loss program, and that you've recognized that sugar is hurting you, as in your body doesn't process sugar properly and you put on weight because you just eat all the cookies in the jar, or maybe you like a chocolate bar every afternoon. Come on, we've all been in those seasons. I'm saying I've had those seasons for sure. But if you want to reset that priority, you've got through the hard journey of giving up what you used to do. You know, if you've ever had to give up, like if you've given up smoking, or you've moved away from your family and you have to give up that just seeing them on the street every now and then, something major like that is a reset, and any reset is challenging. And I'm applying that to your priorities. So if in the last season of your life, your career was important to you, and then you suddenly retire and you've got all this time on your hands, that reset of priorities is what upsets most people, and they get into depression because they suddenly realize they've got nothing in their life of any meaning. So resetting priorities is challenging. And finally, how do you make sure you're going to make progress in this? I think for me, part of it's being accountable. So when I talk about things, I suddenly realize other people know about it, and I become accountable. And then walking this out with those closest to you. So for me, that'll be family and very close friends. How am I going to get the benefit of these close connections and find refreshing through that? So I just answering my question on the podcast live, haven't written that down. I've decided I'm going to use, in the positive way, I'm going to have these close friendships and family members become the pathway through which I find my refreshing. And that's going to be fun to discover that. So that's a tough conversation. And I've called it the toughest conversation because I think people avoid it. But what's good about it is hard work produces results. And if you're prepared to do the hard conversation, the toughest conversation, then I know you're going to have fruit in your life because of it. And my prayers are with you, friends. My prayers are with you that God would abound in grace and love and revelation and wisdom as you ask these questions in the quiet of your space, and then you discover the answers that God's got for you as you have the conversation with Him included. And that's the best way to do it. So may God richly bless you as you have the toughest conversation. Don't forget to invite Jesus into that conversation. And I look forward to catching up with you soon where we have Coffee with Phil. Until then, take care.